Rania, we are going to move on to another major story here. That is the ongoing reign of terror by immigrations and customs enforcement in the Los Angeles, Southern California area in conjunction with the federalized National Guard. And I think Border Patrol is there, LAPD, despite, claiming to not be down with them, more or less doing the same thing. But we're going to hear about all of that, and we're going to hear about people standing up and pushing back against these raids from our next guest, Michelle Zuno, who is an immigrant rights organizer in Los Angeles. Michelle, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on the freedom side.
Well, look, it's an honor to have you here with us. I want to start with last night because, what took place in the march. I mean, people may have seen that the mayor, Karen Bass, she said that there was going to be a curfew at 8 p.m. She's been saying over and over and over again in all her press conferences, as has been the governor, Gavin Newsom, we support peaceful protest. We support peaceful protest. Tell people what happened last night, because it really feels to me that it was a real mask-off moment for the LAPD, Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, I mean, last night we saw how this curfew is not even really being enforced, right, or respected by the law enforcement. Last night, thousands of Angelenos gathered peacefully at Pershing Square at 5 p.m. Then we march to LA City Hall to really demand ICE, right, the National Guard and the Marines out of Los Angeles. And then, when the demonstration arrived at City Hall around 6:30, a full hour and a half before the curfew, demonstrators were being brutally attacked by LAPD and LA County sheriffs, completely unprovoked, right? They attempted to kettle us. They shot flashbangs when we were just peacefully marching to the City Hall. Rubber bullets, were being thrown, and, trampling over people with their horses and declaring the march to be this unlawful assembly, right? And so we've been seeing this gross violation of our First Amendment, right? Our right to freedom, free speech, right? Our right to assembly. But clearly, right, these kinds of tactics, they're really just showing us the true nature of, what side the police is on, what side the law enforcement is really on, right? And it's actually not going to stop this movement that we're seeing here in Los Angeles.
It's really interesting the way this has been so politicized, as obviously Donald Trump is leading the charge here and those who support him. And you even have, I'm just sorry, I'm reading this like news alert from my phone, so forgive me for looking down. But you have a senator called Alex Padilla of California who was forcibly removed and handcuffed after interrupting a news conference by Homeland Security Secretary, which sounds pretty crazy to be removing and handcuffing a senator. But that said, and then I saw a clip earlier this morning when I was watching a segment about what's happening around what Trump is saying, and he was like addressing these military guys, and he mentioned Karen Bass's name, who's the mayor of Los Angeles, and everyone started booing. So there's this alarming aspect of, the real politicization of law enforcement and the military in a very, scary kind of way. But at the same time, we have to also remember the role of some of these Democrats. And in the case of Mayor Karen Bass, I mean, she was elected with some progressive support, but she's now enforcing curfews and, backing the LAPD repression, at least. I mean, the LAPD is not under the control of Donald Trump. LAPD is under the control of the mayor of Los Angeles. So I'm curious, what's your response to, I guess, her actions and the way leaders like her have been participating in the crackdown on immigrants, essentially collaborating with ICE in many aspects, while then also kind of being victims of this authoritarian power push by Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, we saw, right, that the Trump administration authorized the deployment of 2,000 National Guard members and 700 U.S. Marines to LA. We've seen both LA Mayor Karen Bass and the California's Governor Gavin Newsom immediately object to this decision, right? They've had these press conferences condemning the Trump administration, but they've still done nothing, like you said, right, to protect the people from these ICE raids. Governor Newsom, he is the commander-in-chief of the state's National Guard. So he can easily exercise his authority and tell them to retreat, right? Tell them to go home. But instead, he's filing a lawsuit, right, against the Trump administration, a lawsuit is not enough, right? These press conferences are not enough. These statements are not enough. And, we've also seen, right, that Mayor Bass has condemned the administration, but she has also really condemned the people in a way for protesting, right, for defending our immigrant communities. She, like, many others, especially like the corporate-backed media, they've really zeroed in on to the really small percentage of people who are, vandalizing property or supposedly looting, but that kind of terror does not compare to the true terror that we're seeing in our communities happening as we speak, right? It doesn't compare to the rage that we're feeling in this moment. Families are being separated as we speak. And so it also doesn't compare to the majority of what we see in these protests, right? Peaceful demonstrations that are happening. And instead of protecting its people, Mayor Bass has set a curfew in parts of Los Angeles. Um, and she's not really focusing on the major problem here, right? That our communities are in fear, our communities are under attack. And so what is she doing to protect those families, right? And so I think that there's a lot of, Trump versus California, but at the end of the day, it is us, it is our immigrant community that is under attack. And what are they doing? They aren't doing anything.
No, I think that's an important question because I think it's an important framing about how we even got here, which I hope you can speak about, Michelle, because I mean, it's not like ICE showed up and started handing out tulips to people. As you mentioned, there are these brutal raids that were happening, sort of made for TV type raids. And by made for TV, I think even like Dr. Phil showed up at some of them. Obviously, Trump is the president. People who hate immigrants control Congress. So it seems to me that the idea that this is some sort of like out of control riot makes no sense. I mean, it seems to me like it really is more like people really don't have any choice but to stand up for their own rights if they want to stop these, very brutal, terroristic, inhumane policies. I mean, I'm editorializing here, but it feels to me like it's important for people to have that framing. Like it's not as if some people just, woke up one morning and said, hey, we're going to go do X, Y, Z.
Exactly, right. And this all started last Friday when we saw, these blitz raids happening all over the city. There was a huge community response to these raids, particularly in the fashion district of downtown LA. Community members were shouting out know your rights information, asking for their names so their families were aware. Community members have been only met with violence from these federal agents, from the police, from LA sheriffs, like I mentioned. They've been throwing flashbangs, injuring many people, including David Huerta, who is the California president of one of the biggest unions here in the state. And, it's been really a sight, right? And we saw in over the weekend, federal agents preparing to raid Home Depots, right? In particular in Paramount, which is a city in Southeast Los Angeles. It's actually a couple miles away from me right now, and also on the border of Compton. And these are working class neighborhoods with a high population of immigrants. It's no coincidence, right, that they're targeting cities in Northeast LA and Southeast LA with these raids, given its highly dense populations, its big populations of immigrants, right? And the community response has been incredible to see, right? We're seeing that people are fighting back. They're saying, ICE, get out of Paramount, ICE, get out of Compton. We're seeing federal agents and LA sheriffs there really protecting these agents, right? And supposedly they're not collaborating, but we're clearly seeing that they're definitely in cahoots. And so, I think it's really the people's resilience, right, to stay in the streets that has really kept people like me to really continue to fight back. And we're actually seeing, some victories, right? DHS and ICE agents, they're lodging in several hotels in the county. And, the people have been successfully been able to mobilize and really demand that these hotels kick them out. And we saw this happen in the city of Glendale. We saw this happen in the city of Arcadia. And so, we can't really predict what's going to happen next, but we know that the people are angry. We know that the people are full of energy to continue to fight back and protect their communities.
Michelle, obviously this is such a national struggle at this moment because the scenes that you're describing have been happening around the country, with immigrant communities being brutally attacked and families separated and people being thrown into detention and even deported. And at this moment too, I mean, I think the fear is meant to, or the intimidation, the violence is obviously meant to shut people up, to use fear as a tactic so people stop protesting. Because at the end of the day, that's what they want to hear. And of course, you also don't want to walk into Trump's trap, too, because he's trying to find any reason to justify invoking a harsher and more brutal response, which is why the repression has been so severe. So I'm curious if you can speak to why it's so important to continue to show up, to continue to loudly oppose this, despite the fact that, they're really trying to intimidate people so that they just, stay home and keep quiet.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely important to continue to come out to the streets. Last night, our demonstration was completely peaceful. There was families, that were there showing up together, chanting. And I think the fear, obviously it is coming from the administration, but it is also coming from the mainstream media, right? They're creating this narrative, right? They're really just hyper focusing on, these really small incidences of like cars, driverless cars, on fire, when it really it ignores the whole picture of what we're seeing in the streets, right? And that's why, I appreciate independent media like Breakthrough News that is really trying to, show the reality, right, that working class people are experiencing. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the mainstream media plays another role, and I think we're trying to combat that narrative by showing them that the people are not going to be deterred, that we're going to continue to, take to the streets, we're going to continue to assemble because that's our right.
Well, I'm glad you said that, and I think it's important to assert that. And I want to ask you about another question that I think is being, used to, in my view, dehumanize people there in Southern California, and that is the prevalence of Mexican flags at the demonstrations. Also, there have been El Salvadoran flags, and of course, many people who I personally, and again, I'm editorializing here, consider to be racist, are saying that, oh, well, this is a sign of like a foreign invasion, and that they don't really belong here. Funny, no one ever says that on St. Patrick's Day or Columbus Day, but anyway. I wanted you to just address that because I think that's an important part of these narratives that are being put out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't ignore the reality that in Los Angeles, one of the biggest population is the Mexican population, right? And there's a lot of undocumented Mexicans, but there are also a lot of Mexican Americans, including myself, right, that live here, that are from here, and I think that my people, we have a lot of pride. And I think at the same time, like we are a community that deeply protects one another. And so when we see that our community is under attack, like that's why we're seeing so many people coming out to the streets, waving the flag, to really show that our community is not just going to hide in the shadows, right? That we're actually going to be out there, that we're actually going to make our voices heard. Oftentimes, like, the immigrant community has been characterized as the sleeping giant, right? That we won't fight back, that we're too scared. But in fact, it is the opposite that we're seeing right now. We're seeing a lot of people, a lot of young people that are mobilizing for the first time, right? That they're calling out their own actions in their own communities, in communities that we've never really seen actions like this, sparking up. So I think it is really important, right, that we also understand the makeup of Los Angeles, and a big part of that is the immigrant Mexican community as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's an important point. In Chicago, they dye the whole main river green in St. Patrick's Day, and there's Irish flags everywhere. If you go to New York on Columbus Day, there's Italian flags everywhere. No one ever says the same thing. So, I mean, it's unbelievable, but an important point, important actions that people are taking there. We really appreciate you being willing to join us, Michelle, and help us sort through everything that's really happening in Los Angeles. And as it develops, we may be calling on you once again. So hopefully you'll be willing. Thanks for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much.